Hi everybody, happy Sunday, and today I'm going to show a quick video on making this little trifold card with my Gemini and some tips I have along the way. So, my friend got married a couple years ago, and these were the cards that I made for her wedding invitation. They're very easy to do, but they looked very elegant. There was a lot of compliments on them. So I was doing some experiment today with my Gemini Jr. So I'm going to put this right off to the side here. And making this card. So it is a Anna Griffin extended folder. So let me show you guys here what I mean by that. So normally what you would do is you have your big shot or big kick and you run it through with your folder. And this is called the ribbon flower card. And I do use the Anna Griffin paper. This came out of her Christmas stack. I like this paper because it's a thicker quality. It does have a nice sheen to it. The paper size is 5.5 by 12. And they have a metallic sheen to them. It doesn't have the weight of the paper on here. But it is a thicker cardstock. And like I said, it has that shimmery sheen to it. So again, you would line this up, and you want to be careful with this folder, and I'll show you in a minute why this one's my favorite. There are some straight cut ones. There are some that have a decorative edge to them. This one has like a little bit of a scalloped edge there. So when you line your paper up, you want to make sure that you have it all the way to the edge here. Okay? And this paper barely fits from side to side. So we want to line that up very carefully on the edge, all the way down, because the paper will move a little bit when it's going through the embossing process and shrink down. So I just, again, double check my edges, that it's all the way down on the edge here, that it's lined up all the way down on the edge here, and lined up all the way at the top. So I can see at the top that it's a little short for me, so I'm going to pull it up just a hair on the top there. All right. Okay, so I digress. So I wanted to use my Gemini. I'm trying to not use my big shot because, you know, I invested this money in the Gemini, and you guys have seen my video where I've raved about it. And the first thing I thought was, okay, if I use this in my Gemini, how is it going to work? Because I don't have extended platforms for the Gemini Jr. I only have the extended platforms or cutting plates for my big kick, my big shot. So, of course, I did my normal sandwich and ran it through. Well, it didn't work. There wasn't enough pressure, not enough layers to make it work. So then I took a couple of sheets of the paper and just laid that on top and ran it through. That didn't work either. So now I'm starting to get creative. By the way, you do this at your own risk. I'm not responsible for any damage that you might cause to your machine. I feel like I've used the machine enough that I have an idea of what it can and can't handle. So I'm experimenting with my machine. If you do this, you're doing this at your own risk. I'm just giving you some ideas on what I did. So the next thing I did was I took this magnetic vent cover, and you can buy this at your local hardware store. There's normally 3 in here for, I want to say $5 or $6. I use these and cut these down to keep my dies on, and this is how I store my dies. So it's very thin. I cut it down, and then I put the dies that match my stamp sets in with my stamp sets. So I took one of those, and I cut it to match the cutting plate. So I have my base plate, my folder with my paper, my magnetic shim that I've now made, and the top plate. So you can imagine when I did this, oh my God, I thought it was going to work. Well, it did, but there wasn't enough pressure. So again, I put a couple sheets of paper in there. It still didn't impress enough. So I thought, okay, I got to find something that's a little thicker that's going to work. So I took my platform, the Sizzix platform, which looks like this, or the sandwich, right? And on the end here, it had all these little screws. So I took all of the little screws apart. So now my sandwich comes apart. I'm going to put the base plate and the number 1 tab off to the side. I don't need those. And I'm going to use the number 2 tab. Now the number 2 tab has this little plastic piece which hangs over the edge, and I didn't want to cut that off in case I would want to use it again. So what I did was, again, my sandwich, my embossing folder with paper. I'm now going to put this tab in between, and I have this facing down, and I think I used another 1 sheet of cardstock. And actually I did the cardstock over the folder so I could see exactly where I needed the pressure. So 1 sheet of cardstock, my tab 2, and now the top cutting plate. So let's see if this works. Okay, and when I start feeding it through, I feed it through with that plastic thing first. So the cutting plates will go first. Okay, so it's inside there. It's not hanging out. And then everything's square down at the bottom here. Nothing is hanging out on either edge. This will fit and run through the Gemini. So here we go. Now you can hear it kind of bog down there. If it thinks it's not the right fit, it will reverse and kick it out. So here we go. It's telling us it's too thick. It's not going to work. So it went about halfway through. And my cutting plates do have the little B positioner on there, so that's adding an additional pressure. I'm just sticking it back in the other way. I'm not pressing it. I'm not forcing it. And again, I do, you got to kind of experiment. I did this a couple times before thinking about recording this video. All right. And that little click noise is it releasing the folders at the end there. Let's see if this worked. Beautiful. In fact, this probably had too much pressure. I probably could have done without the extra paper. So it did cut that out. All right, so moving on to the card itself. Just showing you that you can use other plates in the Gemini Jr. Just be careful with how you're making the sandwiches on them. That's all. All right, so then once that's cut out, I have a cutting mat here. The edge, and this is one that I experimented with earlier, so this is not exactly a pretty one. Let me move you guys down here. This little decorative edge, you can use scissors to cut it, or I just use a craft knife, and you just follow the raised edge of the folder there. And you want to press down pretty firmly because this paper is really thick, and get as close as you can to that raised edge. So you can see there. Or you can go through with scissors. And you're going to do that on both sides. Once that's done, then you're going to want to fold your edges down. So what I recommend is, this is the raised side up, is folding it outside first. So in other words, the normal fold of the card would go inward like this. Because this paper is kind of shimmery and fancy, it does tend to fray when you're creasing it. 2 ways you can avoid that. You can mist the paper, so you can take a light mister and mist the paper, which will help prevent that. But I'm lazy, so I don't want to do that. So I fold it outside in first, and I'll show you why I do that. So this would be the opposite way of the fold. And there is a crease line there, so you can see exactly where you should be folding it. So what happens here is because I'm bending the fibers of that paper on the inside, some of them will start to pop up. I don't know if you guys can see that. What I then do is I take a little bit of glue. So I just take some multi-matte here, multi-medium matte. And I like this glue because it is matte, it's not shiny, and I just put a little dab on my finger and I rub that along the edge. So any of those frayed edges will just kind of go back down into place, and it just kind of strengthens that fold there. And it dries pretty quickly. Once that's done, I just leave it alone for a second, and then I can go back and crease it back over to the other side. So because you started by folding this in instead of out, you were stretching the fibers on the inside of the card, which most likely no one's going to notice, versus on the outside of the card. So these have a little bit more give to them now because they've already been stretched once, right? So then once that's done, you have your card, you have your edges cut. Now this card, for whatever reason, instead of folding it outside in, I folded it inside out. It really doesn't matter. It still looks really nice. Here's another one I did, and I believe this measures, let's see here, just about 5.5 by, almost 5.5 by 5.5 square in the center here. So I cut the black mat to 5 by 5, and then you would cut another layer, and this is another piece of that pearlized cardstock. I believe I cut this to 4 3/4. Yeah, 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. And then you would stamp your sentiment on there. So we will pretend this is a stamped sentiment. Heat emboss it if you want to make it look really fancy. I think these make great wedding cards. They're very simple to do. They look elegant. And then it's a tri-fold. It folds over. And then you would just grab some ribbon. And you can do a belly band by just cutting a piece of vellum and putting a vellum belly band on it that slides right off. And I like this design because you can use it for a wedding. You can use it for a birthday. You know, any kind of graduation event, and you can have the colors match. So this is my real quick, terrible ribbon tying thing. All right, so you guys get the gist of the idea. So just a real quick and easy way of making an elegant tri-fold card. Again, using the Anna Griffin folders, tri-fold folders, and using your Gemini Jr. Again, you take your own risk. The machine is not cheap. It's almost a $200 machine. So, but again, my sandwich was using my cutting plate, taking apart my multi-purpose platform. If you don't have this, then I would recommend just shimming it with either the magnetic sheet or a couple sheets of paper, and then your folder, your paper, and then your cutting plate on top. So I'll show you guys that one actually, because it did go through a lot easier. However, it just didn't emboss as deeply. So cutting plate, magnetic shim, embossing folder, paper, cutting plate. I'm going to put this extra piece of paper on there because I know it needed it. Let's see how that goes through. I know it goes through a lot easier than using the extended platform plate. So here you can see it did emboss, but it's just not as deep. Still not bad. I mean, I think maybe 2 shims of paper would have worked out better. Still came out pretty nicely. So there you go, guys. If you have the extra long cutting plates and you have some extra magnetic shims laying around, you can make your own and use the Gemini Jr. with extended platforms. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, post them below. I appreciate you guys and your comments and your thumbs up. And keep on stamping.